Hi, everyone. I'm Rena Sapansky with Emerge New Mexico, and welcome to the webinar. I just wanted a chance to really introduce Celinda so that you know what an authority she is and how lucky we are to have her with us. So she is one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, and I do want to say that she is absolutely beloved in New Mexico. She has been here many times and worked with many of our candidates, and she even spoke at one of our Emerge galas, which was a phenomenal success. So thank you, Celinda, for all that you've done for our state. But she is known for her cutting-edge research on issues including the economy, healthcare, the environment, and education. She's worked for a number of groups, including the DNC, Planned Parenthood, Human Rights Campaign, Emily's List, the Kaiser Family Foundation, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. She is one of the nation's foremost experts on electing women candidates and on how to frame issues to women voters, which is particularly what she's going to be sharing with us today. Really key information for those of you who are interested in running for office or those of you who help women candidates. This is really the cutting edge stuff that we need to know going into next year's election. And Celinda and her firm have worked with numerous women candidates as well, including Nancy Pelosi, the first female Speaker of the House. So with that introduction, thank you so much, Celinda, for being here with us, and we will have time for questions. So the way to ask questions is to type it into the Q&A box. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will take those questions either as they come, if appropriate, or we will certainly leave some time at the end of this time to answer those questions. So thank you, Celinda, for being with us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm really glad that we allowed time for it, so that was really, really nice. Thank you. So if we turn to slide 2, first of all, people do say that they think that there aren't enough women in office and that it's important to elect women. Unfortunately, people think that does not predict at all to supporting women candidates. Secondly, most voters think it doesn't matter whether there is a man or a woman running for office, and when we ask people's preference, because it's tough times, because many of the offices that people have in mind are executive offices, they say they lean toward a man, actually, with most people saying it doesn't make any difference. And among voters, when they talk about their friends and neighbors, for whom they may be more accurate than themselves, they even think their friends and neighbors have even a bigger preference for men. Younger women, millennials, are not particularly supportive of women candidates. Baby boomer women, African American women, unmarried women under 55 are. But the millennials, even though they say it's important, have not been particularly supportive of women candidates. So we start out at more of a deficit than I think we would have thought we started. And it's hard to remember that it's 2015. These seem more like 1980 attitudes. Voters do think that men and women make equally good political leaders. But as we see on slide 4, people are really divided about whether or not women govern differently. And this is actually the single biggest predictor of supporting women candidates. So if we had a general, overall, long-term goal of changing some of the attitudes out there, we would get out there more stories about how women govern differently, how they produce different results. Men in particular tend to think that women are not that different. Women are more likely to think that women are different, but that tends to be truer among older women than younger women, and it's not an overwhelming sentiment. People do think that more women would make things better, that things would be governed better on slide 5. Women in particular tend to think that, but it's very low intensity. So in general, we've got a situation where there are some things we could communicate that would increase our chances for our women, but right now it's not, the atmosphere is actually not that positive for women candidates. So the next thing we looked at were for the Women's Donor Network, and we did this research with Anat Shanker and also with David Binder's firm. And what we looked at were what are the messages and what are the ways to talk about more women in office? Because unfortunately, talking about more women in office isn't very helpful. Just calling for more women in office. International comparisons don't work very well. They do work a little bit better with millennial women, but don't work well at all with the rest of the electorate. Explicit calling out of women and people of color is not that successful. Coupling it with class and age, which are people's bigger concerns right now, helps, but that coupling isn't that easy. One of the things we found is that people also think, well, this is just inevitable. Women don't run, they don't like politics, they don't want to run, maybe they're not as competent, they don't win as often. And the conversation things that indicate that there is a problem. Someone is caught, therefore do something about it. Some of what we did was changing who has access to power, eliminating barriers to running for office, talking specifically about barriers like access to donors. Facts and numbers, unfortunately, don't work very well. The facts don't matter to people. They're not very good with the numbers. And even talking in general about misrepresentation, lack of representation, it doesn't tend to help our cause very much, in part because people feel like, well, I got a lot of problems on my plate already. This is a new one, and I'm not that interested in dealing with it. The next page, page 8, shows you our 3 winning messages in terms of generally trying to set the agenda around electing more women in office. And you all can have all of these slides, so I'll go over it quickly. But one is talking about needing the full team. And this language right now of we need to tap into the talent and energy of all Americans is very, very strong with people. And the full array of talent that America's team has to offer. It's inspirational, it's aspirational, it's positive, and it just speaks to something that is being felt very strongly right now. We also found that messages that talk about solutions are much better than messages that talk about the problems. First of all, people do not want to buy a ticket on the Titanic. They do not want to buy into more problems. They've already got enough on their plates. And secondly, people aren't really clear, well, what would you do about this? Women just don't want to run. And so we talk here about changing salaries and hours so more people can afford to run, educating the public, which is a big solution people like, and the result for people, that this will solve a problem. It will get us a government that better represents us. And finally, invoking historical ideals. So talking about America as a nation founded on an ideal of government of, by, and for the people. Our current representation doesn't hold a monopoly on these abilities, and then talking about electing more people. 2 things that don't work. It doesn't help to tell people that women and people of color are a majority of the electorate. That's actually quite threatening to people. So that is not, and if we had this message to do over again, we would redo that part. And it also helps when we're talking, particularly for women, not so much for men, but to talk about qualified elected officials. And of course, this is something that infuriates all of us, right? People constantly say they'll vote for a woman if she's qualified. They never use that qualifier for a man. God knows the men haven't been doing that great at job that they can rest on their laurels. But that said, it helps in the short run to say qualified women. We'll also talk a little bit about how you can appear qualified to voters. So America's full team testing very bipartisanly. It works because it creates a collective a notation or connotation without being too collective in language. America still likes personal responsibility, individuals, and all that stuff, but they're also yearning for community, coming together, joining together, and so this taps into that sentiment. And then, as we said, tap into the talent of all. A team working together accomplishes more. And actually, some of the best visuals were visuals showing men and women working together in a team-oriented environment. Our more perfect union, this was also quite strong, very strong with Republicans. This is strong even though it explicitly mentions women and races, but it doesn't start out with that. It mentions it providing a broader connotation. And in general, providing a broader connotation, listing other groups besides women and people of color, like age, people of different economic backgrounds, people from different geography, mentioning the ideals first and then the goal is a powerful way to structure this kind of conversation. It also tests very well language like we're all equal, we must pick the most qualified, and every child's dream or every kid's dream, which is very, very strong language for people. Finally, our third message, solutions, it talks about the problem, but it really talks about the solution, educating the public, making it possible for people who aren't millionaires to run. It also embeds the argument for women and people of color in a conversation about other problems, in a class-oriented conversation. And that's actually the conversation that Americans want to have, more so than language that is around gender and race right now. Money in politics is also a very, very strong theme, in part because it identifies, again, a solution. And this is a solution that people want, period. The money in politics message is testing very, very strongly. And it's a good message for women candidates because particularly if you're a challenger, you will have less of the institutional money. And then voters in general think women have less access to money. They're sensitive to this notion of having our system have a more level playing field. Finally, we listed the message sounding the alarm. This worked great for Democrats. It did not work great for independents and Republicans, but for base voters, this notion of we're not a representative democracy and we need representatives who have walked in people's shoes is very, very strong. Some of the language that works well to talk about disparities is talking about opportunities, harnessing the opportunities, tapping into all of our talent and energy. A team working together is smarter, would better represent all of us, need representatives who have walked a mile, change the conversation. Our country is changing. All positive, all communal, but still regard for the individual. Invoking shared values like of, by, and for the people, a real democracy, America's promise, any child can achieve, a nation founded on the idea that all people are equal, representatives who are as varied as we the people, all of that tests well. And even if, and that's true even with people of color, even if these are not ideals, America wants these to be ideals. Talking about money in politics, also very, very successful. If we're talking about the problem, we want to talk about the problem in a way that relates to everyday people's lives, that suggests that this is a humanly caused problem, so it can be a humanly solved problem, and that it has implications for the results that people want. So it doesn't respond to the needs of everyday Americans like you and me, haven't produced results. When power is not shared, things break down. Then, talking about the hurdles or the barriers, throwing up hurdles, not distributing campaign contributions, clinging to their seats of power, a good old boys network. Now, good old boys is very appealing to women and people of color. It is alienating to men and whites. And talking about white men is alienating to all whites. So we want to be careful about how much we characterize the opposition. Again, offering solutions, changing us access to power or donations, correcting the imbalance, picking leaders who are qualified, educating the public, changing office officials' salaries and hours, all of that very, very popular. Talking about some specific policies works well as well, and women are particularly credible on equal pay for equal work, resources for public schools, policies that are in touch with real people's lives, and women's reproductive health care or health care in general. Those are the issues that women have great credibility on. Women need more credibility on the economy, and we'll show you that data in a moment, but very, very important for women to develop alternative credentials and to develop credibility on the economy. What kind of language doesn't work? Well, it's alienating whenever we refer to people of color and women or numbers, particularly when they're alone, when they're early in the conversation. People think of it as divisive. Critiques of America that are too strong. We want to talk about things being out of balance, but we have to be careful about being too critical, particularly of our democracy, because Americans are having a crisis of confidence, and they no longer believe in American exceptionalism, but they don't want to abandon it. The one place they still see us as exceptional is in our democracy, and they're going to hold on to that no matter what. We've talked about a couple of these, so let me move on to slide 23, which is our last warning of not being too harsh. It is detrimental to call out white men, failures of the system, and exclusionary politics. Again, people want more solutions than problems. They also don't want all whites characterized. They don't want name calling. They don't want a calling out of what they perceive to be divisive politics. Now, they do like removing barriers, and talking about removing barriers, talking about access, that all works very well. Second, what are the themes? So if that's how we talk in our day job generally about increasing the number of women in office, what are some of the themes that those women can be particularly successful in? And voters in general see women as better on women's health care, in healthcare in general, women's rights and education, as well as equal pay. And by the way, on equal pay, it's just better to say that women are paid less than men rather than women earn less than men. In fact, that's the problem, right? We don't earn less than men. We earn exactly the same, but we are paid less for it. It also helps to say equal pay for equal work, because people think some of the problems on equal pay for equal work are age-related, many are gender, some are race, and that seems more inclusive to people. If we turn to slide 26, you can see here ranking a Democratic woman over a Republican male, and you can see that she has the advantage on women's health, abortion, birth control, education, health care. She's at a disadvantage, however, on economic issues, including ones that affect the family, taxes, jobs, and the deficit. So all of these issues, these economic issues, are where women really need to work on the credibility. Democrats are behind Republicans on these issues as well. So Democratic women get pushed even more behind men than Republican women in terms of these issues. Notice, however, on the bottom of page 27, that Republican women are rated behind on jobs as well. So jobs is a problem for Republican women as well as Democratic women. It used to be that women had a lot more advantages. They were rarer, and people wonder whether they were qualified, but they had advantages as change agents and advantages on governing on better priorities with less partisanship. As we've gotten more women in office, and particularly some of the Tea Party women, voters no longer think they're such a change agent, and they tend to see some of them as very partisan and having bad priorities. So just claiming better priorities as a woman isn't always going to be that successful. It is better to talk about working out compromises, and that is particularly true with older voters, less true with younger voters, but very true with older voters. And then being better than their male counterparts at improving quality of life and family life, again, better for older voters, but still a lot of voters say, I don't see any difference. We elected these women and they really didn't produce. So women have some advantages, but the advantages are diminishing because voters are saying, well, we've got lots of women and prove it, because we elected women and I haven't seen it. Finally, we wanted to share with you some data on how to present yourself. And of course, if we had a nickel for every time a voter said to us, I would vote for a woman if she were qualified, never saying I would vote for a man if she were qualified. We know that voters are more nervous about voting for women, process them making mistakes more dramatically, and just see it still as a situation where the standards are higher for women. Confidence is critical. There is no on-the-job learning. Women candidates need to come out, be ready for the debate, be ready for the speech. And the way you run your campaign also will reflect on how confident people think you are. So if your issue platforms are great, but your campaign is in total disarray, that can hurt you. There is also a double bind for women, of course. Voters are perfectly comfortable voting for a man who is qualified, but who they don't like. And in fact, Peter Shumlin, the head of the DGA, was a candidate at one time who was in that boat when he was first elected. Voters, especially women voters, will not vote for a woman they do not like, and they want a voter who's qualified. A candidate who's qualified. This is particularly important, and we can look at slide 33, since Obama's victory, because a lot of people who support Obama say, well, I thought he would get more done. And I think some of this is inexperience, so I think you need to be more qualified than I had realized. Women, there are lots of traits that show qualifications. Being knowledgeable, being honest, standing up for what's right, getting results, confident, organized, having a vision, being in touch. All of those traits, voters say, are very important as a way to show your qualifications. We also tested, by the way, being able to handle more than one thing at a time, being a multitasker, and voters said, no, that doesn't get you results. That doesn't make you qualified. It makes you a woman, but it doesn't necessarily make you qualified. Slide 36, voters agree that it is harder for women to show that they are qualified. And that's true in lots of different realms. And people say on slide 37 that their friends and neighbors would tend to say that men are more qualified than women. Similarly, voters say it's very important for a woman to be likable. Now, the best news is slide 39, and this is just a set of the examples, but it's a set of things you could do that make you qualified and likable. Bringing Democrats and Republicans together to get things done, standing up to an opponent in a debate, starting the campaign with a listening tour, having an interview with a tough reporter and confidently answering questions, pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps, issuing an economic plan endorsed by both business and labor leaders, being successful in the business world, being a single mom who's been successful. What's interesting is graduating from a prestigious school, not considered as important in terms of qualification or likability to voters. The good news is many of the same things that make you qualified make you likable. The bad news is not all of us has all of these things. And the last thing you want to do is ever exaggerate your credentials. One of the things that's very interesting, if we look at slide 40 on the double bind that women are in, is that everybody makes mistakes. Women's mistakes are more visible to the voters. Women, though, can recover from mistakes and have more tools to recover than men do. So voters, for example, want a succinct answer. They want you to accept responsibility, make a clear answer, and then move on. So women tend to explain themselves too much. And one of the things you want to do is make a short, succinct answer where you're taking responsibility and where you're talking about what you're going to do to make sure this never happens again. Responsibility, by the way, is different than taking blame. And a lot of women candidates resist taking responsibility because they don't want to be blamed for the mistake. Turns out voters are going to blame you anyway, and taking responsibility people perceive to be different. The other thing that helps women candidates is validators. So endorsements help a great deal, but pick up an endorsement and keep that in your back pocket for a while, so that when your opponent accuses you of making a mistake, you can pull out that endorsement, because those third-party validators are very, very helpful in terms of women overcoming mistakes, because voters worry, wow, I was taking a risk with her and she made a mistake and now I don't know if she can handle the job. So having a validator, very important in that regard. The last slides are the slides of the different methodologies, so we won't go in them, and I want to allow lots of time for questions and comments. So let me stop there, and let me open it up to questions and comments. Question?
We do have one question, and again, to ask a question, put it into the Q&A box on the bottom. The first question is curious about Hillary Clinton in her announcement and initial candidacy, saying that she was running on her merits, and one of her merits was that she is a woman. And based on your research, Celinda, do you see that as a successful message? Do people see being a woman as a merit, or just the fact that having more women candidates is a more reflective democracy?
So Hillary Clinton is a very unique model, and she was considered the most qualified candidate by far. And so she's one of the few women in America that, because she's been engaged in a 40-year proving of her qualifications, she doesn't have to prove them right now. She has, and you can see her juggle this, have more of an issue with likability. So in some ways, she's more like a man in that way. She also, I think, needs to, and is trying to create a woman's base for her candidacy. So I would say this, I think she's kind of a distorting model to base your campaign on, because she's such an iconic, unique figure.
Great. Thanks. A second question about methodology. Celinda, is that available somewhere? Is this published somewhere that people could download? And also, would you talk a little bit about your methods on this one?
So this comes from a variety of studies. So, and all of the studies are available, and the methodologies are available as well. So the reflective democracy work was done for the Women's Donor Network. They have the full report posted, and you can also see the dials. We did focus groups, a survey, and dials are the moment-to-moment reactions that people give to the to what's being said. And that was a nationwide dial test, and that is available on the Women's Donor Network website. On the qualified and what it takes to be qualified and how women can present themselves, that is from the Barbara Lee Family Foundation. And all of that work is available online as well. And that work was done by a joint team of Chesapeake Survey researchers, Republican pollster, and Democratic pollster.
Great, thank you. Great question. Are there differences in the results by region, or
you know, that's a really interesting question. Remarkably little, much less than we would have expected. Now, I think all of us think that the South is a little bit unique in terms of how women communicate shared values. And we would love sometime to do what is the most winning profile in the South, because I do think it's a little different there. But no, there were very little regional variations in this data.
Question about Mitch McConnell and Hillary. So Mitch McConnell recently tried to play the gender card to discredit Hillary Clinton's campaign, and her campaign flipped the script by playing a literal gender card. Do you think that was an effective tactic?
Yes, I do think it was an effective tactic. I think that there are two things about that. And I think she's really ably used gender this time. Again, it's a little bit of a different situation because very few, I mean, she's entered this race with people thinking she wasn't that comfortable using her gender. And she's become quite comfortable, and I think she's using it in a very, very effective way. For women, as you're introducing yourself, you're constantly juggling, right? The winning introduction of yourself as a woman and the losing introduction of yourself as I am Helen Reddy, watch me roar. And I love Helen Reddy. But so I think the thing that we need to do here is it depends on the candidacy, depends on the field, it depends on your record. But one of the things we need to invoke in general is third-party responses. So we've tested that language, for example, about I want to be judged for my ideas, not my appearance. And appearance coverage definitely hurts women. It's very effective if the candidate calls it out, but it's even more effective if third parties call it out. And they have more latitude. They also don't have to worry about, after a while, if all you talk about is, you know, this thing happening and that thing happening, then voters are going to lose patience because they want to move on and discuss other things. So I think picking your moments, and there's a great effort that many of you have heard about, but I would just really encourage all of us to participate in, which is Name It, Change It. And it was started by the Women's Media Center, the Women's Campaign Fund, and Gloria Steinem. And I think what it talks about is enlisting all of us to call out this kind of sexism and gender-based coverage and expression. One thing I would say is that the blogs are some of the worst. The online stuff is an absolute nightmare, and the nature of the language that they use. So as we do our monitoring efforts, whether it's in your campaign or you're working for a woman and say you can help in this way, we need to be sure and keep track of the blogs too, because they are just completely unmeasured in the way they talk about women.
Yeah, that is a great point, and it's, you know, being noted in a lot of different worlds as well, like the gaming world, etc.
Yeah.
So this is a great question that I'd love to add to a little bit. So the question is, you know, when you're establishing your qualifications and confidence in being able to get things done, if you're dealing with a particularly undereducated electorate, how do you do this and not appear like someone they don't identify with. And, I would add to that, noting that it's important for women candidates to show that they are confident and knowledgeable. I think confidence comes with presentation, but how do you show an electorate that you are knowledgeable, and again, not go too far and not be someone they could identify with?
Yeah, really good question. And let me also say qualified. So first of all, part of it can be having other people do it on behalf of yourself. So we did an experiment where we had women introduced as qualified, same exact introduction, but qualified, and then the other people, we didn't have qualified in it. And the people that were introduced as qualified rated as significantly more qualified. So one of the resolutions we should make to ourselves is whenever we are introducing a woman in any world, we should always say that she's one of the most qualified, she's qualified, she's one of the most capable, she's knowledgeable. We should seed that terrain constantly behind our women, no matter what realm they're in. And as a campaign is providing introductions to people, be sure and include that language and explain why. Secondly, whenever you're acting on behalf of other people rather than on behalf of yourself, it's easier for the voters to accept and less distancing. So if your record of accomplishment is not straight A's for yourself, or winning this prestigious award for yourself, but getting homeless kids food, or fighting for the resolution that got a smaller class size, or creating these jobs, or this small business incubator, then you're acting on behalf of others, not yourself. And that people are a lot less sensitive of the chest pounding in that setting. And then finally, I would say, voters see politics as a pretty egotistical world and also a pretty class world. And women usually skate through on the egotism. People are much more likely to think that the men are egotistical. And the women opponents often bring that out, by the way. And voters think that a woman will know what the price of a gallon of milk is, et cetera, where a guy will have no idea. He'll have sent his staff to buy it or whatever. But also, you don't need to upgrade yourself. I mean, one of the things where women really get into trouble is they will lie about their education credentials because they'll think it's bad if I haven't finished school. Over 60% of voters haven't finished college either. So don't worry about it. What they're interested is in what you got done, what you learned in the School of Hard Knocks, et cetera. And you saw how weakly the prestigious school tested. So don't create, a log cabin if you didn't have one. But if you came from a working or middle class background, you should talk about it, talk about what your mom and dad did. And remember that it's the class element that ends up usually being more distancing than the prestige element. Excuse me.
That's great. So a couple more questions. There are often different perceptions of women of color and white women in the media.
Yes.
And, what's the most effective way for women of color to dispel stereotypes when presenting themselves as qualified political candidates?
Well, so we need more work in this. And you're absolutely right that it's different. It's different by community of color. It's different for women of color. In general, and it's also different. It isn't all women of color are not the same. I mean, people think, for example, that African-American women are quite tough and that they often have gotten things done on their own. On the other hand, there's no white equivalent of the quote-unquote angry black woman stereotype. So it's a constant juggling act. And Latino voters, male Hispanic voters, can be quite judgmental of Latinas and not that supportive. And they can be the ones who are thinking, well, you're kind of distancing myself with all this talk of what you've done and who you are. So it differs a lot. There's no one simple answer. In general, what appeals to everybody right now is a track record of getting things done for people. Now, we tend to start introducing ourselves by talking about ourselves personally. It usually looks like that it's working better right now to introduce your track record of getting things done for people, then go to who you are personally, which also has the advantage of getting your personality out there at precisely the time that you're likely to be personally attacked.
Great. So just have a couple more questions. If anyone has a critical question, please add it now. One of the questions is regarding the recently released report relating to prosecutors and the fact that very few women and people of color are prosecutors. Do you believe there are any differences in how women candidates and also some of the messaging is deployed in these issues around prosecutors and wanting a more reflective democracy in that specific office? And is that related to maybe differences around how people view legislators or policymaking folks versus law enforcement?
Yeah, so very good question. And it's absolutely true that it is tougher for women. And it used to be the problem that we had with attorneys general's jobs, that women, it used to be very hard for them to get elected attorneys generals. Now people have moved the job to more of a consumer focus and fighting for them on home mortgages and predatory loans and stuff like that. And so it's gotten easier for women to get elected. But for a long time, it was quite difficult for women to get elected as in judicial offices. We polled for Marilyn Mosby, actually, the state's attorney of Baltimore, who did the Freddie Gray case. And here was a young, very attractive African-American woman running against a white, seasoned, very establishment, gray-haired looking guy. And people just really questioned whether she could handle the job. And there were two answers to that. One was credentialing her up front. We were very aggressive about always talking about her being qualified, always trying to credential her. The second thrust of the campaign was once you cross that threshold, women can be quite viable because it's like a question of who are you working for? So yeah, you're damn effective, but who are you effective for? And one of the best examples I can give you is Debbie Stabenow beat Spence Abraham in Michigan. Spence Abraham originally, when she first started running, had terrible job performance and was thought by voters to have done absolutely nothing. $9 million later, he fixes that, and he's running on, I'm a workhorse for Michigan. And she ran her ads on, yeah, he's a workhorse, all right, but who's he working for? And then went into conflict of interest and campaign contributions and a very vivid healthcare case that he had missed. And then in her final closing ad, she took the picture of this young girl who had died and said, I'll never forget, I'm taking Jessica's picture to the U.S. Senate, I'll never forget who I'm working for. So first establish your credentials and then establish that you are, who are you working for? And women tend to have an advantage on the latter.
Great. We just have two more questions left, so if anyone has any other questions, please enter them into the Q&A box at the bottom right now. Before we get into these last two, I just want to let everyone know that our next webinar is called Follow Hillary's Lead with Brenda Carisi Carter, who's director of the Women Donors Network's Reflective Democracy campaign. And it's going to be specifically talking about getting more prosecutors elected and making that body of elected officials more diverse and more reflective. It's also going to include a couple of Emerge alumni, Emerge Virginia alumna, Sheriff Stacy Kincaid, who was the first female sheriff in Fairfax County in Virginia, and Emerge Maine alumna Megan Maloney, the first female district attorney for a couple of counties in Maine. So it's basically a focus on what it takes for women to run for law enforcement, and that's August 5th. You can sign up on emergeamerica.org. Great. A couple questions here. So here's an interesting question. As women leaders and candidates, and also in terms of messaging, how do you compare Elizabeth Warren's style with Hillary Clinton? And if Elizabeth Warren was in the presidential race, would she garner more support as a woman?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, because for the latter question, in some ways, the comparison is, so how does Elizabeth Warren work vis-a-vis Bernie Sanders? Elizabeth Warren had to work a lot on, and this was true in her Senate race, on balancing her very hot rhetoric with her more cooled off, very comfortable, very approachable personal style. And, and people were surprised who didn't know her to hear the strong rhetoric come from her, because she struck them as very safe and calm and collected and not threatening at all. So I think there was an interaction there that helped her. It is certainly true in our times right now. People are responding to stronger talking women too. But one of the things that both she and Hillary had to juggle was maintaining likability with all this strength, and showing a sense of humor and showing it at appropriate times and seeing the more human element. And it goes back to the notion that voters are perfectly comfortable voting for a man they think is qualified and don't like, but won't do that for a woman. So I think that Elizabeth had to balance it somewhat, and worked on that, and also was advantaged because her own personal persona just didn't come across as rough and ready.
Great, right. So just a couple more questions. One is, how do we motivate men or more passive supporters to be more proactive? The background being that very few men seem to show up in these discussions about how to get more women elected.
That's a really good question. And I will say, even in the Women's Donor Network piece, the women had more intensity than the men, for sure. One way is through their daughters. We passed affirmative action literally in Australia based on organizing male business leaders around their daughters. So we went in and recruited specifically bankers and business people, venture capitalists, et cetera, who had daughters. So men are very mobilizable. It's like, yeah, well, of course my daughter could do that, and should be able to do that, and she should be able to vision herself doing anything she wants. So that's one thrust in terms of recruiting men. It's not necessarily the most effective message to men, but it's good in terms of recruiting men. Secondly, we have to create some intensity around this notion, and we don't have it right now. And so I think the best way to recruit men would be to get women more excited about it, and therefore talking to the men in their lives and telling them what it means to them, and being the brand advocates, if you will. And right now we don't have that. Women are not that excited, honestly, about this notion. And even after all the work on the Women's Donor Network, these were not the strongest messages we had ever tested. These were good messages, and we finally got to the place of being good. And men really liked the message of America's team. They were very responsive to that. And then the third thing I would say is, it helps in terms of recruiting men to include class and age. So if you talk about, for example, money in politics, excluding people who aren't millionaires, excluding younger men and women, excluding young entrepreneurs, excluding women, excluding people of color, then that, or not providing access, then that is going to help recruit the men because they can see themselves in it, and making sure that our rhetoric does not seem to be attacking, especially white men, because they were very sensitive to it, actually.
I'll throw in the last question, which is from me, which is, in New Mexico, I think we've seen a few matchups recently where women who have been teachers, healthcare providers, community health, providers, that kind of thing, are matched up against incredibly well-educated men for them. And in that context, how do voters perceive qualifications such as I've been a teacher for 20 years, I've been a foster mom, I've been a lifelong, worker, union member, that kind of thing. How do those women candidates really show that all that they have to offer and show that they're qualified and knowledgeable and that kind of thing in the face of a candidate who has perhaps an Ivy League degree, is a physician, more what people might consider to be more academically qualified?
Oh, people actually don't like academic qualifications very much. They don't like prestigious schools. They don't want the smartest president. And if there was ever anyone, if you think back to it, who exemplified that, it was Al Gore versus Bush. I mean, hard to imagine, right? Yeah. And then some of us think we won to date, and we went and tested. We actually did the focus groups testing for Al Gore, I'll be the smartest president, and the first round was wildly unsuccessful. And the second round, we went back in because he just didn't want to believe it. And voters were like, I don't give a damn. I don't want the smartest president. I want somebody smart enough to hire the smartest people to get the advice. But people think that often the smartest presidents will be too cerebral, too removed from the public, take too long to make decisions, too deliberative. And even Obama has suffered somewhat from that. So people like that kind of earthy smartness that is represented by Clinton, who's, very, very smart, but never represented it even though he had gone to prestigious schools, et cetera, never represented it in that way. And people thought he gets it, and he gets how to get it done, which doesn't necessarily take book smarts. So there's a kind of anti-intellectualism that's still pretty strong in America, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, I don't see any more questions. I want to take a minute to really thank Celinda Lake for being with us today. This was an incredibly useful presentation. I'm sure all of us, and one of our most popular as well. So I know that we'll be taking this information back and deploying it with a lot of the work that we're doing. So thank you, Celinda, very much. And thanks to all of you for participating. I hope you'll join on the next call, which will be about getting more women to run for law enforcement and how they can be successful law enforcement candidates, and that's on August 5th. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for supporting our mission of recruiting, inspiring, and training more Democratic women to run for office and win.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the team on here, Flora and Kate and Jesse, who are really the yo women and got this done. And thank you all so much for running.
Thanks, Celinda. Thanks, everyone. With that, we'll end the webinar.